Chapter 40. Vow to never forget. Never. This was the very first divine statue the people had built for him, and it was also the most magnificent and stately. In the past, seeing this version of himself, Julien had simply accepted it, not seeing any problem. Yet at that very moment he saw that golden, scintillating giant figure as endlessly foreign, and he couldn't help but think, is that really me? Fengshen and Muqing went about separately to check for trapped victims who hadn't yet been found. That flicker of confusion passed quickly, and seeing the crowd settling, Julien breathed a sigh of relief. But before that breath was completely exhaled, his heart lurched when he suddenly felt a heavy weight on his body. That celestial pagoda was too tall and too heavy after all. The divine statue also seemed to find its burden strenuous. Its hands trembled, its feet sank into the ground, and its gigantic, golden body was slightly bent from the pressure. Only that smile remained unchanging. Seeing this, Julien immediately cast another spell. However, when the spell was cast, his heart dropped. Not only did the golden statue not straighten up, it was pushed down even further and looked like it might not be able to hold on much longer. Julien's hands, too, started trembling. He had never felt like this before. Whatever mountain he punched, that mountain must fall, and should he stomp, the earth would quake. This was all he had ever known about himself, and at that moment he had never so fully understood the concept of strength falling short of desire. With no other choice, Julien clenched his teeth and leapt into the air. He landed and seated himself on the foot of that gigantic golden statue before raising his hands to cast a spell once more with renewed force. This time, he joined the fray himself. And sure enough, that golden statue rose again. Its head shot up, and it raised the leaning celestial pagoda up once more. Although he managed to bear its weight, both Julien's back and his mind were rolling with cold sweat. However, the countless people outside the palace were ignorant of his unspeakable hardship, and were already approaching in waves to prostrate at the miraculous golden statue, hollering as they did, In the kingdom's time of need, His Highness the Crown Prince has shown his divine spirit before us. Your Highness, you must save us! Save the people! Protect the world! Julien was gritting his teeth, and it was a while before he managed to say, Everyone, please stand up and back away. Go further. Do not stand around here. He trailed off, suddenly realized that he was actually running out of breath. His voice was drowned out by the tidal cheers, and the more he tried to amplify it, the smaller he found himself to be. Julien drew a deep breath and was about to shout again when a hand suddenly grabbed his ankle. He looked down, and it was Qirong. Qirong, hurry and tell everyone not to crowd around here, he quickly said. The pagoda might collapse. Those words were unintentionally blurted, and when Julien realized what he said, his blood ran cold. In the past, it wasn't just that he would never have said those words. The mere thought of them would never have entered his mind. Even if the sky was going to fall, he would have believed he could support it. But now he realized something alarming. He no longer believed that. Not only had the people stopped believing in him, even he could no longer believe in himself. How can it collapse? Aren't you holding it up? Qirong responded instantly without thought. Hearing him, Julien felt his heart quaver again. Qirong didn't notice his ashen expression, and his eyes were bright with a hungry look. Cousin, let me help you. Julien was taken aback. Help me? How? Didn't you say you knew how to inflict human face disease? Qirong immediately replied. Tell me how to do it, and I'll help you curse Yong'an. I'll help you kill them. So he did hear everything they discussed while he was hiding under the bed. Julien was weak from sheer anger. You fool! Don't you know what a curse is? However, Qirong was nonchalant. I do. Isn't it just a curse? Cousin, let me tell you. I have quite the talent in this area. I curse my dad often, and I suspect he may have died from my curses. Julien couldn't listen anymore, and said, Just go. No! Qirong exclaimed. Fine, don't tell me how to cast the curse. Just tell me, how can I avoid getting infected by human face disease? Julien's heart continued to drop, and Qirong pressed him. You know how, right? You know why the soldiers weren't getting infected, don't you? Cousin, tell me why, please. There were still many palace attendants gathered nearby, and who knew just how many ears were listening. Shi Lian was afraid that leaking information might start something terrible, so he remained silent. But sure enough, some people couldn't keep quiet any longer and began to bombard him with questions. "Your Highness, is that true? You really know how to cure human face disease? Why didn't you say anything?" There was a ravenous glint in the people's eyes, in Qirong's eyes. Shi Lian kept his mouth shut tightly, managing only to grit a response through his teeth. "No, I don't know anything!" That caused a small disturbance in the crowd, but it didn't escalate. Just then Fengshen returned. He saw from afar that Qirong was lurking near Shi Lian and barked at him. "What are you doing?" "Fengshen, come take him away!" Shi Lian immediately ordered. Fengshen acknowledged the command and came forward, but Qirong latched onto Shi Lian as he cried fervently, "Cousin, you're going to defeat Yong'an and chase them all away for sure, right? You'll protect us for sure, right? Right?" A few months ago, maybe Shi Lian would have still emphatically answered with fervor, "I will protect you all." But he didn't dare do so any longer. Qirong's expression was wild with excitement, and Shi Lian was a little puzzled watching him. He knew very well that Qirong was not the type to be concerned with the kingdom, nor its people. Even if the kingdom was doomed, he should be more scared than anything. So why the excitement? Moments later, he suddenly remembered. Wasn't Qirong's father from Yong'an? Hearing no response, Qirong's voice suddenly turned sharp. "Cousin, you won't really let this happen, right? Are you just going to let us be trampled and ridiculed like this? Do we really have no other way?" Under this interrogation, Shi Lian could feel his heart breaking, because he realized Qirong wasn't wrong. In the face of everything, he really didn't know what to do. "Let me go and request that the king detain him again," Fengshen said. Even while being dragged away, Qirong was still struggling, and he roared, "You have to hold on! You can't fall!" He couldn't fall. Shi Lian himself knew that he couldn't afford to fall. Even if the nearby civilians evacuated, the Celestial Pagoda might not be allowed to fall. The Celestial Pagoda must not be allowed to fall. If it collapsed, not only would the centuries-old royal monument be destroyed, the main part of the Grand Avenue of Divine Might, with its many residences, would be demolished. Moreover, within the pagoda there were countless rare treasures, centuries-old scrolls passed down from countless ancestors of generations past. They couldn't be retrieved in time, and if the pagoda collapsed, they would all be gone. And if it collapsed, it would bring down with it the royal eminence of the kingdom of Shenle. However, his spiritual power, like Yong'an's water, seemed to be draining by the day. In order to support the gigantic golden statue, he couldn't leave his position for even a moment. He had to pass on the duty of guarding the city to Fengshen and Muqing while he staunchly remained where he was, meditating with enforced calm. And since that dozens-meter-tall golden statue was the divine statue worshipped on Mount Taikang within the Royal Holy Temple, after Shi Lian summoned it over, the devotees had no idol to worship, and they came in swarms to pray to it under the open skies. Although this was the palace and outsiders shouldn't have been allowed to enter, the earthquake had collapsed a section of the palace walls. The capital was in chaos, and there wasn't enough authority to go around. Even if there was, any more oppressive acts of authority might incite another riot, so the people had to be let through. Shi Lian stayed seated there, and the king and queen would visit him every day. Days passed in a blur as he spent all of his power holding that celestial pagoda up while trying to restore his energy at the same time, waiting for a time to come when he could be relieved. The king didn't have it any easier. His hair was now mostly white, and even though he was in his prime, he had the appearance of a man over 50. When father and son saw each other, though they didn't speak, they were now more at peace with each other than ever before. The queen had watched Shi Lian grow up, but she had only ever seen her beloved son in a state of elegance and divinity. Now it was with sorrow and grief that she watched him bitterly guard the palace, exposed to the harsh elements, and refusing to let anyone close to help cover him. She stood under the scorching sun herself to shield him from the rays with an umbrella. After a while, fearing that she was exhausted, Shi Lian spoke up. "Mother, go back. I don't need this. Don't come near, and don't let anyone else come close. I'm scared that—" But in the end, exactly what he feared never left his lips. The queen's back was facing the devotees gathered there, and having kept her composure for so long, tears at last streamed down her face. "My child, you suffered so terribly. Why would such a punishment befall you?" The queen painted her face heavily to hide its pale, sallow complexion, but with her tears the foundation melted and revealed a woman who was no longer youthful. She grieved for her son, wept for her son, but she didn't dare weep out loud for fear that the people would notice her upset. The king held her shoulders, and Julien watched her in dazed confusion. When they suffer, the first thing people think of is their loved ones, and to Julien this meant his mother. It would be pointless, perhaps, to state it aloud, but after days of exhausting strain, after having been cut down again and again by countless knives, right then, he really wanted to be 10 years old again and run into his mother's embrace to cry to his heart's content. And yet every road he walked that had led to this day was chosen by Julien himself. His parents were already in a difficult situation, and with so many citizens watching him intently, he could never show a trace of weakness. If even he couldn't hold on, who could? Thus Julien spoke against his heart. "Don't worry, mother. I'm all right. I'm not suffering." Whether he was suffering or not, only he knew deep down. A few palace attendants came to help the king and queen away, and as they left, they looked back with every step. Once they were gone, Julien was again exposed under the scorching sun, and lethargy overtook him. Some time passed, and when he opened his eyes again, dusk was setting on the horizon. The setting sun had shone its last rays, and only a few scattered devotees were left below him. When he looked down, he noticed that not far from where he sat, there was a small, lonesome flower. Julien wasn't very sure when exactly that flower had been placed there, and he reached to pick it up. It was a tiny flower, snow white, with a lush green stem, its stalk thin and weak, bearing tear-like dew, pitiful looking. The faint fragrance was almost familiar, and though ordinary, it gladdened his spirit. He clutched the flower tight despite himself and pressed it near his heart. Just then, the sudden stench of blood overtook that faint fragrance. Julien looked up, and his sight was muddled by a screaming shadow that hurtled toward him. "Why? Why?" Startled, Julien repelled his attacker with a wave of his sleeve and tried to summon some strength. "Who?" The shove sent the person tumbling and rolling over the ground. Julien still had to support the giant's golden statue and didn't dare rise. He didn't dare go close, but it only took a second for him to recognize who it was. That individual only had one leg. It was the young man who had once given him an umbrella, the one whose leg he'd personally amputated. That young man was covered in blood. With equally stained palms, he had come crawling using both hands and his one remaining foot, and there was a horrifying trail of blood behind him. He sat up with difficulty, and Julien asked dumbfounded, Why are you here? Why aren't you recuperating in Bouillon Forest?" The young man only crawled closer, not answering. Since he only had one leg, it was a horrifying sight. "You!" Julien exclaimed. In a fit, the young man yanked up the trouser hem of his remaining leg and demanded, "Why?" On his right leg, there was a contorted human face. This was one of the things Julien had worried about the most. And sure enough, it had come to pass. If he wasn't already seated, he might have fallen over. The young man slapped the ground and roared, "Why did you cut my leg off? It still came back. My leg is gone. Why? Give me back my leg. Give me back my leg." That rainy day, this young man's face had been full of smiles when he stuffed that umbrella into Julien's hands. Yet before him now, he was in a state of madness. The difference was striking. Julien's mind was in chaos, a complete mess, and his voice trembled. It took him moments before he snapped out of it and said, Let me help you." He quickly cast a spell to suppress the evil poison cultivating in the young man's leg. Yet unexpectedly, the sound of wailing came from all around, and several more people also lunged at him, crying, "Your Highness, save me! Your Highness, save me! Your Highness, look at my face! I've cut off half my face, so why is it still not healed? Why? Just what do we have to do to cure this? Your Highness, look at me! Look at what I've become!" Scene after gory scene was endlessly thrust before him. Julien's expression was blank with shock. Not knowing what to do with his hands, He waved them as he mumbled, "No, I don't want to look! I don't want to look!" As it turned out, once the human face disease patients from Boyo Forest relapsed, a full riot erupted at last. Shockingly, they managed to fight through the soldiers and doctors guarding and nursing them, and escaped the camp in search of him. Since they had all escaped, if he didn't immediately suppress their infections, the disease might spread faster to the wider population. Shilian closed his eyes and tried to work his powers, wanting to help alleviate their symptoms and relieve their pain for the time being. However, as soon as that group was taken care of, more swarmed over to surround him. "Your Highness, me! Help me, too!" Surrounded by dozens, Shilian vaguely felt the golden statue above him swaying, and apprehension filled him. Wait, Someone couldn't wait and cried, "No, I don't want to wait! I've already waited too long! Your Highness, why would you treat him but not me?" Soon the voices around him changed. "How come when you treated him, he was good as new? But I'm not any better! Aren't you a god? Why are you so unfair? I demand justice!" Shilian argued back, "No, I'm not being unfair. This isn't on me. Your symptoms are different. If you're going to help all the way. Now you want to drop everything. What exactly are you playing at? Is it up to you to decide?" Shilian was having trouble catching his breath. "I'm not dropping anything. I'm just wait. Don't you know how to cure this disease?" Shilian opened his mouth. If you know, why won't you tell us?" Shilian clutched his own head. "I don't know anything! You're lying! I already heard someone talking! You know! I've seen through you! You won't tell us because you just want us to keep begging you like this so you can steal our donation money! Liar! You're a liar! What's the cure? Just tell us now!" Shilian's face was white as a sheet, his eyes vacant. Countless hands shoved him, and there was even a pair maliciously strangling him. Then the most ridiculous thing happened. He was clearly a god of heaven, but in that moment, a feeble voice cried out at the bottom of his heart, "Save me."